Every year, billions of dollars pour into international aid organizations. But where does the money actually go? Are communities in need getting the help they deserve? Or is it just being lost in a maze of bureaucracy, overhead costs, and red tape? In this video, we're breaking down the shocking truth about international aid and the real impact of your donations. And before I forget, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.
Right now, there are more people facing acute food insecurity than in previous years. The reality portrayed is staggering. The recently published Global Report on Food Crisis tells us that in 2024, more than 295 million people struggled to meet basic food needs. That includes nearly 2 million people facing starvation in places like Gaza, Sudan, and Haiti. In most cases, these food crises are protracted. 80% of total food insecurity is in contexts that have had food crisis for more than a decade. Conflict remains the main driver, but weather extremes and economic shocks are deepening the pressure. Failed harvests, rising prices, and lost incomes are pushing rural families past the breaking point. The report also reveals that we can turn the tide with the right support. In countries like Afghanistan, Kenya, and Guatemala, food security improved in 2024. That means that there are millions fewer people now acutely food insecure. And this is thanks to sustained, timely agricultural support, which is leveraging better weather conditions and improved local economies. Looking ahead, the picture is complex. Funding is shrinking. Crises are intensifying. And this means we have to act smarter and we have to act at scale. At FAO, we know that agriculture is one of the most powerful yet underused tools that we have to curb food insecurity. It's 4 times more cost-effective than other forms of food assistance. It feeds more people. It helps communities recover faster. But it receives just 3% of total humanitarian funding to food sectors. The Global Report on Food Crisis gives us the data. The solutions are clear. It's time to scale up investments in emergency agriculture and livelihoods. It's time to deliver more impact with fewer resources. Agriculture can be the answer. Emergencies cannot wait. We have the answers to acute food insecurity, but we need the right support.
Africans have a reason to be suspicious of international aid organizations. What are international aid organizations? Well, they are entities that are often non-governmental that provide assistance to developing countries. This assistance can take the form of funding, technical expertise, and project valuation, with the goal of promoting development and humanitarian needs. These organizations may be motivated by moral, philanthropic, political, or economic reasons. I became aware of the problems in regard to aid organizations through the main arguments put forward by the book Dead Aid by Dambisa Moyo. It is a book that argues that foreign aid to Africa has not only failed to achieve its intended goals for reducing poverty and promoting economic growth, but it has also contributed to economic stagnation and political corruption. Despite criticisms against the book and praises for the book, overall, Dead Aid provides a provocative argument that challenges conventional thinking about the role of aid in development. And it suggests new approaches to promoting economic growth and reducing poverty in Africa. A lot of Africans view aid as a disguised form of imperialism, where Western nations impose their values and priorities on African nations, neglecting the needs of the locals and the context of the locals. African suspicion of aid organizations stems from a complex history of colonialism, neocolonialism, and perceived corruption, which have led to a distrust in external actors and their motives. This mistrust is often fueled by a belief that aid is used for political gain and to undermine indigenous institutions rather than genuinely supporting development. Two such aid organizations are the World Food Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The World Food Programme, which operates within the United Nations, is the world's largest humanitarian organization, assisting almost 120 million people in approximately 120 countries globally. It was founded in 1961 and it is headquartered in Rome, Italy. While the Food and Agriculture Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations that leads international efforts to defeat hunger and improve nutrition and food security. It was founded in 1945 and it is also headquartered in Italy. It should be noted that donor contributions in 2023 to the WFP came to 8.3 billion. But the WFP stated that its budgetary needs were closer to 23 billion, which resulted in a shortfall of almost 64%. While the total FAO budget for 2020 to 2019 was 1 billion, and voluntary contributions reached 1.6 billion. Combined, that is at least 9.3 billion in funds to both organizations to end extreme hunger. As an African, my suspicions of the United Nations international aid organizations came from a seemingly innocuous headline that I read where the director of the UN Food Security Organization in October 2021 stated he believed 2% of Elon Musk's wealth could solve world hunger. To which Elon Musk responded, "If the WFP can describe on this Twitter thread exactly how 6 billion will solve world hunger, I will sell Tesla stock right now and do it." In response to Elon's request for details, Mr. Beasley tweeted him the math, which was 43 cents times 42 million people times 365 days comes to 6.6 billion. That's how much it would cost to provide one meal a day for 1 year to the population in need. The agency would deliver this meal in the form of food aid, cash, or vouchers. The food aid, said the WFP, consists of commodities such as rice, maize, and high-energy biscuits. Having offered the 6 billion requested to end world hunger, not only was that an inadequate description to Elon Musk, 6 billion was never sent to the WFP, the FAO, nor the United Nations Security Organization, despite the apparent urgent need. Why was it so difficult to explain where the money would go? Another problem is that in terms of hunger, by 2023, 50 million people in 45 countries were on the verge of famine, according to the WFP, an increase of approximately 8 million people since 2021, when the tweet was initially sent. If the humanitarian organizations are doing their jobs, surely fewer people would be on the verge of famine, not more. Extreme poverty is described as living on less than $1.90 a day. According to Mr. Beasley, 42 million people would need 43 cents a day for food for a year, for one meal a day. So let's do the math and take into consideration that the request is solely for food aid and not for administrative personnel nor transportation expenses, such as the infrastructure is already pre-existing. 90 kgs of maize costs 4,500 Kenyan shillings, and that comes to $35. 90 kgs of maize meal is enough to last an adult a year, while women and children eat less than men. So basic maths dictate 42 million times $35 comes to 1.5 billion approximately. Where is the other 4.5 million going? Next, 50 kgs of rice costs 4,300 Indian rupees. That comes to about $52. 60 kgs of rice is enough to last one adult an entire year. Basic maths, 42 million times $62 comes to 2.6 billion. So where is the other 3.4 billion going?
Right now, there are more people facing acute food insecurity than in previous years.
As I mentioned earlier, the WFP and the FAO raised 9.3 billion. They have more than enough reserves per annum to nourish the world, which brings to light the work of Mr. Norman Borlaug, who is a Nobel Prize winner, who died in 2009. He worked on the global food production and is estimated to have saved nearly over 1 billion people through the use of monocrops, genetically modified foods, and petrochemical pesticides and fertilizers. So with access to such prolific work, why are more people on the verge of famine than previously?
That includes nearly 2 million people facing starvation.
Especially when you take into consideration that this work has also taken climate change into consideration. Lastly, where is all the money going? From my rudimentary calculations, to end extreme world hunger, it requires about 3 billion per year, not 23 billion. So they have enough money to end world hunger and to operate. Where is the other 6 billion from the 9.3 billion going? So it is with this in mind that one comes to the conclusion that aid organizations have become complicit in the exploitation of people that they are supposed to help, using the pretense of assisting communities in need without availing the requisite resources to assist these communities to no longer need aid. When it comes to international aid organizations, I am beginning to understand that the journey of every dollar is far more complicated than we might expect. While many organizations like the WFP and FAO are doing incredible work to address hunger, poverty, and inequality, a majority of the funds raised are often going towards administrative costs, logistics, and other operational costs. So what is the result? Not every dollar reaches those in need, exacerbating the need for and the dependency on aid organizations.
We need to understand the real reason why USAID is in Africa. And not just USAID, but other NGOs. You look at DFID, which is the British equivalent, and many other smaller ones. Their sole purpose was to act as if they're coming to rescue Africa. They're coming to fill in the gaps in government services, gaps in education, gaps in healthcare, gaps in humanitarian services. They're coming in the guise of addressing issues to do with human rights, issues to do with environmental protection and social justice. They are coming in claiming that they are introducing grassroots initiatives that are going to help the people. And so they use that as a way to go into the most remote parts of Africa. They're talking about government advocacy. When you look at it on paper, it all looks really good. But they're actually wolf in sheep's clothing. They are using that open access sounding humanitarian to constantly destabilize governments. I can tell you right now, the majority of African leaders, and not just African leaders, but leaders in the developing world, are celebrating the exit of USAID.
Now, the mechanism by which aid has proven so destructive in Africa, you refer to it as, I'm quoting you again, a vicious cycle of aid.
That's right.
Now, explain that.
Okay, so basically, we're in this cycle where governments, in particular in Africa, are dependent on the aid system. And we all know that in order for an economy to grow, we need to actually have private sector development. I sort of flippantly call it the reverse Boston Tea Party. We won't get any representation without taxation. So we need to grow these economies. The problem is when governments know that they don't need a domestic tax base, in other words, they know that they can live or die based on aid money, they will encourage corruption. They're happy to sponsor bureaucracies. They are very happy to disenfranchise African people on the ground. I mean, there's a whole host of things that are happening out of the aid model that basically discourage investment. So without investment, you get more poverty. And without more poverty, you get more aid. And the more aid, again, supports the governments who, again, are not interested in encouraging growth.